Uma produção
Podium.
Last place at the end of lap one comes home to win.
What the is this guy doing? Well, I just want to say you're an absolute legend.
Holy mac and cheese balls. That's another podium.
That was stupid from whoever was at the front. They want to kill us or what? Can you believe it? Can you believe it?
Bem-vindos a mais um episódio do Domingos, o vosso podcast sobre Fórmula 1 e desportos motorizados. Hoje sem o Tiago, infelizmente, mas com um convidado especial que, por não falar português, nos obriga a gravar o episódio em inglês. Peço desculpa aos ouvintes que não falam inglês, mas tivessem estudado, digo eu. So yeah, Beatriz, take it away.
Mark, did you get any of these jokes? Because you know a little bit of Portuguese, right?
Yeah, my Portuguese is terrible today. I was just making notes, listening to you about preparing for this discussion.
Good for you. So today, Mark Preston, CEO of Formula E team este, and my boss, is joining us. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So today we're talking about the British GP, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, that
should be interesting.
The race where nothing made sense at all. But we'll get to that. So obviously it was Carlos Sainz's maiden victory.
Yes, I've been waiting for this for so long.
And at the same time, it was step 5 of Ferrari's self-destruction this season. Am I counting it correctly?
I think so, yeah. I think you're right.
And probably the most confounding step so far. I mean, the other errors that Ferrari have made so far this season, I've understood them. I've seen where they come from. This one, not at all.
Mark,
But
what's your opinion on Ferrari's path to self-destruction with strategy?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, it's the rain, obviously, you know, in qualifying, etc., threw the cat amongst the pigeons, as they say. But in the race, I think they had to stick to their decisions. I mean, there's some interesting discussions over the years. When you're a team that's at the back of the grid, which I've been in teams at the front and the back of the grid, when you're at the front of the grid, you have to follow your strategy. You can't really vary too much from I suppose, what your system's telling you, because as soon as you try to second guess your own systems, then it means that you don't trust your own systems, which means you'll make mistakes. So there's always, when I was at McLaren, they didn't always look the greatest at Monaco. Sometimes people would say they made silly decisions at Monaco, but when you talk to all the strategy guys about what they were doing at Monaco's unpredictable, safety cars, all sorts of crazy things can happen, and you really need to lead from the front, and you can look silly if you follow the plan. And so I'm assuming that they were following their systems, and their systems, told them to do what the systems thought they should do. And really, the problem is when you're trying to win a championship, you have to really truly get to the top and win everything. You've got to trust your own systems. And I imagine that they'll go back and look at what they did in the race and decide to change some of the logic in their systems. And until you get all the systems right, it's very hard to beat, obviously, other top teams who have got their systems to perfection, I suppose, from winning so many times over the recent past. So I'm sort of saying that they've got to get their systems more organized, I suppose.
So what you're saying is that there's no hope for Ferrari fans this year?
Well, that's an interesting comment. They've still got a fast car.
I'm talking about me, Mark. Do I have hope?
My basic strategy is have the fastest car and lead from the front. And they do certainly have one of the fastest cars, and they have led from the front many times. And that's a very good starting point. So the more they can keep doing that, the more hope there is.
All right, so let's get started with the free practice. It was basically an upgrade flurry. This was effectively many teams' first upgrade of the season because of the budget cap. Traditionally, that would have been Barcelona, the first big upgrade package. But that was delayed for a lot of teams because obviously they're still struggling to adjust to the fact that you can't make as many bits as you used to. But surprisingly, the team that made the biggest step, it seems, was Mercedes, who they still looked a lot more competitive than they have in recent times.
Yeah, obviously the British circuit is a bit different to the others. Yeah, as you say, typically you bring the upgrades when you come back to Europe. You know, the first few races are often Australia, etc., have been historically, and you don't bring your first upgrades until you're close to home. And you say about the budget cap, I'm assuming they all decided to wait one more race, and potentially they were validating some things on the Barcelona circuit before they brought them to the British circuits. It's very much, there's a lot going on back at the factory, and they obviously have to be careful now as when they bring them. So it does look like they've made a good step, although, you know, the UK circuit is different to others. So it'll be interesting to see if it's remains the same on the circuits that are coming up next.
Yeah, Silverstone typically rewards cars that possibly have more peak downforce because a lot of the corners are kind of the same speed range, and you don't have so many low speed corners as you do, for instance, in Red Bull Ring in terms of the percentage of the lap. So we'll see if it holds, but they definitely seem more competitive. But I think in other news, it was interesting to see Williams copying the Green Bull, which in turn had copied the Red Bull. They also seem to have taken an uptick in competitivity. I mean, Latifi had his best weekend ever in F1.
Latifi, we're missing Tiago, Mark. Tiago is Latifi. A big fan of Latifi and thinks he's underrated.
Okay. I mean, the copying thing is a funny one. When I first started in Formula One, we used to all wait till Autosport came out every week. So I started in 1996. And when Autosport came out every week, there'd be all these, photos of the other cars, and everyone would grab the Autosport at lunchtime and tea time and stuff like that, and have a look at what was on other different cars, and then everyone would be discussing what do we need to copy. So it's just got more modern, I think, with the latest photo.
Yeah, now it's the same, but the difference is Autosport comes out every morning whenever the cars are on track.
Exactly. So it's quite fast, and you can do photos from every angle, and pretty much recreate something. Your iPhone can do quite a lot, can't it? It's your iPhone with its LiDAR can pretty much scan anything you want. So it's a different world now.
Yeah, that was the theory behind the pink Mercedes from a few years ago when Racing Point suddenly showed up with a car that was, first of all, very competitive, and second of all, looked a lot like the Mercedes. But I guess that's the thing. It's easy to copy something from pictures, but not necessarily.
It doesn't always work, does it?
Yeah, not necessarily so easy to make it work aerodynamically. Whereas, if you do get a way to find some CAD or scan a car or whatever, then things work a lot better. So I'm not sure that's what happened.
If you don't understand the philosophy of what you're copying, then I don't think it's much point. If the first time you copy it, you might get it right. You might be able to recreate the influences of the other car, but if you don't understand why it was done, it's the whole thing. You need to understand why, and that's the problem with copying, is you don't understand why. So it might work once, but it won't work over a season. So I suppose going back to what I said before, winning a championship is different to winning a race. You might win a race by copying something, but you won't win a championship doing it that way. So that's why it doesn't hold, for the whole season. The teams that are chasing can make big steps to try and catch up, but the teams that understand why they're doing it keep iterating and incrementing. And if you know that thing, the Pareto principle, you get sort of 80% of the way with 20% of the effort. So copying gets you 80% of the way for 20% of the effort, but it's that last 20% that takes you 80% to win the championship. So I suppose in some ways it keeps the grid closer together, but to win the championship, you still need to know why and how and understand it to then, go on and do the last little bit.
If all you do is copying, you'll always be one step behind everyone, so you'll never be a true contender.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly.
I was just going to ask, Mark, on that note, you were saying that, teams who win a lot of championships have it honed down, right? So why does Mercedes has lost so much performance this year? Why do you think that is?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I mean, there's one factor is obviously they were ahead of the game when we came into this hybrid era by quite a margin. And I think that perhaps having so much more power over so many years, it allows you to run, maybe not inefficient downforce, but certainly when you're in trouble, they probably were able to run more downforce for the same drag and then the same top speed as others, or switch and have higher top speed for the same downforce as others. And these tire, or any tire, is highly nonlinear, and the person or the team with the most downforce, i.e. the most power, allows the most downforce with the highest top speed, they can optimize the tires differently to anybody else, and it's this like spiral effect. And unless you can get the sort of tires working in the right realm compared to the others, you just don't switch it on. And I imagine that over the years, because they had more power than everybody, don't say they got complacent, but certainly when you've got KPIs, you've got deliverables and you're trying to achieve certain things, one thing can mask the other. And I think in the background, probably Red Bull with Adrian, work with Adrian at McLaren. He's obviously one of the superstars of aerodynamic design. He was probably pulling every little last bit he could out of the car in terms of aerodynamics. And then when the Honda engine caught up, then all of a sudden the aero switches on. It's like, well, the aero's there and now the power's there. And maybe, Mercedes, it's only got to be subtle things. Maybe the Mercedes was just slightly less capable in certain ways, but they had the power to drag it around a lot of potentially slightly inefficient downforce. And so, when the power, the switch of power, I understand the Ferrari may have got, certainly made a step on their curve system. Then all of a sudden, the car that didn't maybe perhaps have the best downforce has now got a slight weakness. And that, you see that happening all the time. So I think you can sort of see also that I think the Mercedes has always run a different philosophy than Red Bull. And again, having worked with Adrian, I think his philosophy of aero is quite unique. And therefore, as rules change, circuits suit different styles of philosophy. Certainly the Red Bull has just come into its own, especially with now they've got the power as well from the powertrain.
So what you're saying is that winning so much made them lazy?
I'm sure they're not lazy. That's the problem. It's really about KPIs. You can certainly, when you give yourself a target, you'll hit the target. But if you're not, we had an experience back when we're developing pre-Braun era, when we're at Super Aguri and Honda, we were targeting getting the same downforce as the previous year's cars. And I think we'd started a lot earlier than everybody else with Honda, and basically our KPI was get to the same as before, where the other people's KPI was, well, we've halved the downforce, so let's get back to 75%, let's say. And so when the Braun arrived on track and was back to 100% of the downforce, and others might have been at 75 or 80 because that was their KPI, then they suddenly say, oh, okay, we're in the wrong ballpark. And
there's a funny story I heard once about. Did you know Pat Fry when you were at McLaren?
Yes, not at McLaren, but certainly I had some things to do with him at Russia.
Yeah, so that's right. Yeah, I've heard a fun story that there was a meeting where they were discussing like basically chassis design and kind of coming up with target weight, with a target weight for the chassis, and they were arguing about it for about an hour. And at one point he just turned, "Can you just make it weigh nothing?" And that's kind of the thing. Like, it's important to come up with KPIs and targets, but at the end of the day, just because if you hit your target, if you still have 3 months to go before launch, you're not going to stop, are you? So I guess that's kind of the caveat of it.
I can tell you that same experience at McLaren. When we did one of the lightest cars, basically, if you're not failing enough things in pre-season testing, you're not pushing hard enough. If you're failing too many things, you've gone over the other side. So finding the balance on the limit is quite difficult. So you can say to yourself, we've passed all the preseason tests, everything's great, but you might be so far away from the peak. And you might have another group of people who's taking a lot of risk, and they're all going over the peak and causing themselves too much trouble. And finding that peak of performance in every little variable is the trick, let's say. So, yeah.
Is that the 18 they were talking about, Mark?
Yes, we had that at our office the other week, running as a simulator. So we went too far in probably every area on that car. But that was a learning experience in itself. Because then you know, all right, you've got to have a balance of too far and too little. Otherwise, you're not on the edge, let's say, of every variable.
Fair play. All right, so let's move on to qualifying. So once again, rain creating chaos for the second race in a row. I mean, was Bernie right about adding sprinklers to the tracks and making the track wet randomly just for entertainment? Because it seems to be working this season.
We can't say Bernie was right. Like, I
we
won't have
can't say
that
Bernie
here.
was right about everything.
About anything.
He can be right about some things.
I think we have the same discussions in Formula E. You know, you can have too many non-linearities or not enough. So we've been discussing this recently and saying, is it randomness or non-linearity? So, you know, tires are highly non-linear in Formula One. That's why you get undercuts and overcuts and those kind of things. And they're the things that create variability. And obviously rain creates a huge amount of variability and makes it quite exciting. So the answer is yes. Rain always causes non-linearities, and it's the ultimate thing. It's incredible in that respect, but I suppose you don't want to be in rain all the time.
No, you want some element of order to be on your toes, because otherwise it's otherwise it's a little bit like your qualifying format from last season, Mark, and
yes,
which is pretty much let's roll the dice and see what happens.
I love that you said it and not me.
yes,
but yeah. So sticking, we talked about it, but Albon out in Q1, Latifi makes it to Q3. I'd love to hear Tiago's reaction on this, because it's pretty impressive. I mean, a lot of, I'm sure you've been around many wet qualifying sessions, Mark, but a lot of it has to do with timing. If you get the lap 30 seconds after your competitor, that could be enough for the track to be that little bit drier that it's worth half a second or more.
Yes.
Even.
It's something like 10 seconds normally, isn't it? Between the wet lap time and a dry lap time, if I remember rightly, in F1. So 10 seconds is a lot of room to move, isn't it? And if the rain just lightens ever so slightly on your best lap, then, as you say, you can be half a second or 3 seconds quicker than the person behind. So it's all about getting out there, isn't it? And just running, and a bit of luck comes into it.
Yep, a team that doesn't seem to have much luck in the rain is Aston Martin. I mean, obviously they're not exactly dominant in the dry either, but they do manage to get to Q3 quite frequently. With Vettel.
Stroll is usually a little bit better. In rain, isn't it?
And Lance does. Yeah, he usually does quite well. And I mean, obviously, he was on pole in Turkey
is weird.
a couple of years ago with very low pressures, which means your first laps probably won't be as competitive, which Aston's were. But then your fifth or sixth or seventh lap will be a lot more competitive, where Aston were just overheating and kind of got it wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw this, João and Mark, but Vettel did something a lot nicer than driving this weekend, which was driving Mansell's car. Did you see that? The Williams.
Yeah.
That was pretty neat, and he owns it too. Can you imagine?
The 92 Williams? Nigel's Williams? Yeah.
1992, yeah.
Keeping those cars running is quite difficult, because that's an active car, isn't it? So,
it is, yeah.
Getting all those different systems running. Is it a Honda engine? It was a Honda engine, I think.
92, I think so. Maybe Renault?
Yeah. It's hard even getting those engines to be running again. I also saw he ran it on synthetic fuel, which sometimes, getting all the tuning of those things right, I understand is quite a challenge as well.
Yeah, they had a lot of older F1 cars on the garage next to the one I was in, not the mantle car. I think that was in the F1 paddock. But it was really funny to see the old laptops that they used to run the cars. Like there was a Minardi from '99 with the Windows 98. Yeah,
wow.
That was pretty, and it was funny because they use the same software we use now, just version 1.3 rather than version 48 point whatever. But it was quite funny.
They also had serial ports on them as well. They also had the serial ports.
Yeah,
that's why you used to
right.
have to run the old laptops. We used to have laptops, Beatrice, when we were young.
I didn't know that, but great.
They were just a bit chunkier
this was before
than
I was
the
born.
ones now.
Yeah. This was before I was born, Mark.
So, in terms of Q3, Verstappen arrives as usual dominating. He was, I think, at least a second, if not more, quicker than everyone else until Q3. But then the mysteries of this weekend start. So Sainz, who was almost out of Q2, he was nearly out of Q2 because he kind of waited a bit to set his first lap, and it started raining harder. But obviously, he obviously put a very good lap in and has a bit of a car advantage over the guys that didn't make Q2, and ended up making it to Q3, and ends up on pole. So it's a strange sequence of events.
Don't say it like it's surprising.
It is surprising because Verstappen's so much better. It's so much faster than everyone in the rain usually that it was surprising. And up until Q3, he was a second ahead of even his teammate. So it was a strange sequence of events. Like Sainz did a very good lap, obviously. Then Verstappen, who had done a 360 a couple laps earlier, a full 360 where he just he probably lost about 5 seconds and not much more in that because he caught it and just kept going. Then Leclerc does the same thing on kind of the final lap of qualifying, which creates a yellow flag for Verstappen in the middle sector. But Verstappen lifts off, and this has happened before. He has so much margin that you think that it might still be okay, but then it wasn't, and missed out on pole by I think it was like 7/100ths of a second, which in the wet is, it's you can gain or lose that in about 10 meters worth of track. It's very small margins, but pretty impressive from Sainz. I honestly didn't see it coming.
Mark, can you settle this for us? Do you think Sainz is a good driver?
He's obviously a good driver, driving for Ferrari. They're all obviously good drivers at the top. But didn't it also dry slightly at the end? If I'm right.
It was a drying track, yes.
So whoever hit the track at the right time and didn't get caught out by yellow flags, and as you say, have to back off ever so slightly, and maybe they hadn't got everything quite pulled together. Was it Hamilton that had to? They told him to cool off for one lap and then go again. Just near the end, I remember hearing on the radio. So there was a lot of sort of random things happening and people trying different things while the track was probably evolving incredibly quickly. And as you say, there was a yellow flag right near the end, wasn't there, as well? So all those factors together, you just got to get everything right, don't you, in the rain? And that's the fun bit about wet qualifying.
Yeah, and obviously Sainz was in the right moment, at the right place at the right time, and to be fair, he did put a lap together, which is also important. It's quite easy to get it wrong in these conditions, and he nailed it. So well done to him.
I think what's really nice to see is that every so often in sport and especially in motorsport, you suddenly get a whole lot of younger drivers or players or people getting a chance, and it's really nice to see all these young, fast drivers at the top. To answer your question, Beatrice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Agreed. So should we move on to the race then?
Yeah, let's move on to the race. So first race start. Verstappen elected to start the race on softs, which obviously come with a big advantage when it comes to the whole starting sequence and the first lap. Sainz starting on medium tyres. Verstappen easily gets past, doesn't get a particularly great launch, but the second phase is very strong because it just has more grip. And wait. Kind of takes off.
Let's not say he took off easily because he was on soft tires and Sainz's reaction time was actually faster. Just so
All
just
right,
so
Beatriz,
everyone's
just-
on the same page.
Beatriz,
Just so
it's
we're
okay. Come on. It's okay. It's fine.
I'm just saying.
We'll say enough good things about science for the rest of the episode. We don't have to. Come on. Let's cut it out. No, but clearly, whatever happened at the start was quite exciting, because even Hamilton, I think he came from P5 to P3. He also had a very good start. So I think I think he was also on soft. So whoever was on soft clearly had a big advantage. But this first kind of race lap, which wasn't, only lasted 4 corners, because there was an enormous crash happening into turn 1. So just it's really weird to try and understand the sequence of events. It looks like Gasly gets squeezed between João and Russell. He tries to pull out of it when he sees Russell coming across, but then actually, if it stayed where he was, it probably would have been less of a shunt, because he just ends up clipping him on his rear left wheel with his front right, which sends Russell into João at a, again, weird angle that effectively flips João upside down in the middle of the straight, which I've never seen anything like this before.
It was a very impressive crash.
These cars are so low that having it flipped like that and continuing in this kind of the same direction was incredible. And then what happened was effectively his roll hoop gets, I don't know, ripped off or ground down or something, and the car ended up skidding on its halo all the way into the tire barrier. I mean, that was terrifying. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mark?
I mean, it's always the worst thing, having been the person who designed roll hoops and crash structures and all those kind of things before. I remember when Pedro de la Rosa had that's not a similar, but we certainly on the start, I think it was Monza, where his car flipped a number of times. You're always worried about the roll hoop. I mean, we did introduce a rule a long time ago, because the roll hoop has a specific test where it's loaded in one direction from front to rear, the left to right, looking at the front of the car, with quite an incredible load. I think it's 12 tons or more, if I remember rightly. 120 kilonewtons. I was at 120. Yeah, very high anyway. There's quite a lot of load put through there, but I couldn't tell. It's only as strong as its weakest point, so it depends on where it failed. Did it fail in the monocoque itself? The roll hoop, I'm sure, passed all the right tests, and if it gets pulled in a certain way that hasn't been potentially validated in, because it's not part of the testing regime. It's a bit like when sometimes the nose box in the past has got pushed off in one direction or another. But the main thing, I think, is that the set or certain reasons just don't let anything get into the monocoque, and from that point of view, it did its job. That it's potentially had some loading from a direction that was not as quite as high capability as the normal way the roll hoop gets hit.
There's been some talk about the fact that Alpha are one of the few, if not the only team that runs. Have you had any experience with that design in the past? Because I know there have been a few cars in the past few decades that have gone for that solution. I think as a way of having more freedom in the airbox design, I guess.
Yeah, we certainly we did look at it at one point. I can't remember why we didn't do it actually at the time. Sometimes you go for kind of a triangular shape, which is quite strong but not so good for the air flow into the engine. Sometimes we used to do the quite open oval or circular shaped roll hoops, but they're more difficult to get to pass because they're not as strong as a triangle. A spike is stronger in one direction, maybe less strong in another, from potentially lateral loads. Each one has a plus and a minus. Plus for airflow, more difficult for loading. So no, I've not done a spike roll hoop before, but certainly lots of other permutations and combinations depending on engine requirements and loading.
Fair enough, but the good thing is obviously João was okay. He was around the paddock even before the end of the race, and after getting all the checks, it was interesting. I think there was quite a lot of concern from the organization. They locked the track down for a couple hours, and no one was allowed in or out while kind of the red flag was going on, and they were trying to figure out if he was okay or not. I think to avoid kind of leaking any images or whatever before F1 had the opportunity to kind of get the situation under control. But in the end, everything was okay. There was obviously a lot of secondary incidents that created quite a lot of damage, but somehow in the end only Albon, Zhou and Russell were out. But I think Tsunoda was dragging his front wing under his front left for the whole lap. Ocon drove back with a flapping front right wheel because the track rod got just slipped in half.
But Russell,
who else?
did you see him arguing with one of the? I don't know,
I mean, I did not understand that at all. In the
Because
whole, I mean, ever since I followed F1, as soon as since they stopped having like T cars and stuff like that, as soon as you get assistance from the marshals, your race is over. Like,
Yeah, but the thing is, what he argued was that he left the car. So just for people who don't know, if you're able to drive your car back to the pits, then you can restart. And Russell left his car, so technically he can't go back. But what he argued to one of the officials was that he left to check if someone else was all right.
Yeah,
So
but
what
he didn't have. He was missing a rear left tire.
Well,
rear
yeah,
right
that's
tire.
that's a fair point. But if you
How
could
are you
have
going to
driven
drive the car
to
back on,
pits,
like missing a rear wheel? It's not
Ocon
gonna
almost
happen.
did. His car was
Well,
falling
with a
apart.
with a missing front. Well, it wasn't missing; it was flapping around. But at least it had the support of the wheel, and it was a front wheel. You know, you can drive a car back with a missing front wheel, but with the missing rear wheel, it's a lot more difficult.
I think they should have let him restart.
No,
Normally,
if
when you spin, you have the anti-stall on the systems. I know that with the curves, you can restart the engine, can't you? But maybe he wasn't actually able to restart the engine, and perhaps thought, okay, that's that, and got out, basically. Because if he didn't think he could restart the engine, then, maybe someone else told him to turn it off as well, to not damage it in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the argument of him leaving to check if João was okay is fair, but I think the car was not in a condition that it could be driven back anyway. So I think the whole what Mercedes were trying to do, I think the Mercedes were trying to do was being allowed to restart the race after the car went back to the pits on a flatbed truck, and I'm like, come on, guys, that would be a big exception to the normal.
João doesn't
procedure,
like
so.
Mercedes.
No,
Anyway,
if Red Bull had argued the same, I would also say that would be silly. But,
that's because you don't like Christian Horner. He doesn't like anyone, Mark.
I like a lot of people.
Well, I'm a fan of Verstappen because I used to work with his dad. He used to work with us at Arrows, so watched him as he was coming up. He's pretty incredible.
Is yours as crazy as he gets a reputation for?
He is a fairly crazy driver. He pushes pretty hard.
Yeah,
to say that.
I guess his son gets some of his
genetic,
aggression
isn't it?
on track from him.
Yeah. Yes, pushes very hard.
All right. So after a lengthy red flag, I think it was about 45 minutes. I mean,
Yeah, it was pretty long.
It was quite long. The race starts again, exactly with the same positions as the first grid, because obviously the crash happened, or the red flag happened before the cars reached safety car line. Before all the cars reach safety car line 2, I think that's the rule. Then the grid stays unchanged. The Sainz this time, everyone starts on the medium tire, at least the front runners. Presumably because strategy-wise it made more sense after the restart, with a slightly shorter race. Second
I have
start.
a question for you both. Does it make you nervous when you look around and see, so in Silverstone, people were running all sorts of different tires. Is this something that you get to the grid and you look around, you're like, oh, maybe we should have done something else?
I suppose,
you can
yes,
still do
but
something
in
else,
some
though.
ways, you got to have confidence in your own. If you don't have confidence in your own, like I said at the beginning, if you're not at that point in your team's career is not the right word, stage, let's say.
Progression.
Progression's the better word. then if you're not confident, you're not confident. And I think that would show. So if you got there and said, oh my gosh, we got it completely wrong, then perhaps you're not ready to win the World Championship. You know what I mean? Because that means that your systems and, as you say, progression is not there yet. You're probably not ready for it. So I think that's probably the answer, maybe. If you do see that, and then suddenly you realize you've done something wrong, then maybe your systems and processes aren't ready yet.
So on the second start, Sainz gets his shoulders out. It was probably the first time I've seen him showing any sort of personality in his racing. He pretty much put Verstappen in the wall and then on the grass into turn 2, and managed to keep the lead. What do you think about this, Beatriz? Tell us all about it.
I think he heard last week's the Canada's episode, where I said that I was very disappointed because I don't know. I just feel like I would rather him crashing the car at times, but trying to do better than just being so conservative. I don't know if you agree, Mark, but I think you can't get to that, Verstappen level if you're not pushing, and I don't think he pushes enough. So I was happy.
There's certainly different types of drivers, and Leclerc and Verstappen certainly were quite aggressive in that race. You'll be talking about Leclerc later, but some pretty impressive moves by him as well.
Yeah, I agree. It is in the drivers' kind of blood, which is why I'm surprised that Sainz, who usually is a lot more conservative and doesn't go for the aggressive moves as often, and often ends up complaining that the others do. It was good to see him showing that he can also get stuck in, and
I think he's realizing that he won't be able to win any races unless he pushes harder. I mean, it's a risk, sure, but I think it's the only way to do it, isn't it?
But at the same time, his job is really, at this stage of the season in the championship, is to support Charles and score points for the team. So I kind of understand that being his approach normally. But when you're starting P1,
exactly.
maybe you have to switch, flip to a different switch, and he did that. In fairness, in the second go only. The first go he was quite soft, but in the second attempt he realized, right, I should probably be a bit more aggressive this time. And then on top of that, Perez had a very, very good start. He was up to P2 pretty much by the time they got to turn 4. Picked up a bit of front wing damage, and there's something we didn't talk about in Canada that I'm really pissed off now, which is
what is
now
it?
Like Magnussen was completely correct after Canada, where he was missing a front wing end plate, which up until this season happened every other race. Like Lewis Hamilton won the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix last year pretty much with half a front wing and no one cared. And now suddenly drivers are being black and white flagged because they've broken an end plate. I really don't get that. I don't know what's happened to the FIA in terms of their approach to this, but as long as the structural part of the wing, which is the main plane and obviously the nose and the pylons and etc., as long as that's uncompromised, I don't understand why drivers are being stopped by missing bits of their front wing. It's really strange, and it happened again to Perez this time.
It's a difficult decision, isn't it? In Formula E, we had some bodywork on the cars in the earlier years where some of the drivers started to try and knock them off as they went around the street circuits because they might get penalised if they stayed on the cars. It's like you say, if it's not structural, it's a hard choice, but it's very subjective, I suppose, because the race director, who probably hasn't designed a wing before, has to make a decision as to whether he thinks that thing is dangerous or not. So you're going to get into very subjective decisions, and I suppose the only way you can perhaps make it easy is just say all people that have something coming off the car have to come in. So it's a hard one when you don't actually know what's wrong with the component.
Yeah, I suppose that at least when it comes to the front wing, they could kind of all sit down and agree between the teams what should constitute a black and orange flag and what shouldn't, because I find the lack of consistency relative to previous seasons a bit weird. But that's all. But that was a very good first lap battle between Perez, Leclerc, and Verstappen. But the reality is Sainz was way ahead of this because of his good start, and he started pulling away slightly. But as soon as the race settled down, Verstappen clearly showed that he had more pace. I mean, the Red Bull looked strong all through FP2 and FP3 especially, in the longer runs as well. And Verstappen quickly got to the back of Sainz, and then this is the first time Sainz lost his race. Under pressure from Verstappen, who was within DRS range, lost the car out of, I think it was Beckett's, so went through the grass and got easily overtaken by Verstappen, who also got a double whammy of getting the DRS just as Sainz was off track, so therefore getting him an advantage on the straight and no chance of Sainz getting him back. But that didn't last long, because Verstappen ended up getting some bodywork damage. By the sounds of it, he got a piece of Yuki's front wing lodged in his kind of floor area, and he was missing. Yeah, I heard that. I also heard that there was some of his own bodywork missing. He ended up missing about 20 points of rear downforce, which, 20 points of downforce is quite a bit, but it's probably not too far from the difference between the Red Bull car and like a midfielder in terms of overall load. But the problem is that was all rear load, which means the balance is quite upset, which then means that your rear degradation is a bit all over the place, and so it makes life very, very difficult. So Verstappen thought he had a puncture because he was missing so much rear grip, comes in, changes tyres, car's no different, and that was pretty much his race done. He ends up, I think, fighting with Schumacher for P7 in the end, which is
no one wants that.
not quite what you want when you're driving a Red Bull.
No, these cars are obviously quite sensitive. That's the first one where we've had a piece of damage that's had such a difference, right? It's quite surprised it made so much of a difference. I suppose it does depend on where the piece of bodywork got stuck, whether it was at the start of the diffuser or something, which meant that the car didn't. Maybe it was 20 points of downforce at one ride height, but maybe at other ride heights it just really didn't work at all. So yeah, quite amazing how much of a difference it made there.
Yeah, I was surprised as well, and I guess those 20 points come from the push rod loads that the teams get live, but maybe if you actually, run in CFD or run that sort of damage in just to assess what the penalty was, you'd see that it was a bit more, because it looked in terms of pace to be a lot more than 20 points.
Yes, indeed.
Speaking of Tsunoda, he had a bit of a moment where he was fighting with his teammate, basically lost the car and ended up taking his teammate Pierre Gasly out in the process. Mark, you've had some teammates bumping wheels every now and then. How do you think that this will be managed by France over at AlphaTauri?
I mean, there's two things here. Go back to my previous comment, which is the best strategy is to have the fastest car and lead from the front. I do find that, when you're mixed up in battles in the middle of the pack, just all sorts of things always go wrong. The further back you go, the more things just seem to get, people get frustrated and maybe differing levels of concentration in the race at that point and other things. Yes, we've certainly had those comings together in our team, although many times there was actually, I'm not going to say good reasons for it, but misunderstandings. So I'll give you an example. The one that's the most famous in Formula E, when we're in Santiago, where Andre went in the back of Jev, and luckily they got round the next corner. One driver, our whole garage went down, the power failed, and so we couldn't see anything on the TV. We couldn't see the lap times coming out of the cars. We couldn't communicate with the drivers.
Oh, scary.
And so while we were, let's say, dark, and we were communicating via pit boards and things like that, Jev thought he was on one lap longer, and Andre on one lap shorter. So one thought one was slow, and one couldn't understand why the other one was so much faster. And as soon as everything switched back on again, we started communicating again and said, guys, reset your laps. And as soon as they reset laps, they went, oh, that's why you're so much slower. That's why you're so much slower, faster and slower. So I found so many times there was some sort of communication issue that went on, and then every so often, obviously, frustrations get the better of them. But if you've got two top drivers and you're at the front, it's a whole lot different to running in the middle of the pack where people are getting frustrated and probably, annoyed with what position were they in at the time? They were reasonable, weren't they?
I think they were just in the points. But like around that.
Well, that makes it
P10.
worse. That makes it worse when you're just in the points, especially in F1, given the amount of money that's involved in every single point that you get. So I'm sure Frenstad will be pretty upset, given that they were bringing home points.
All right, and the next point is while this is going on, Leclerc, who had front wing damage from his first lap, kind of bumps and bruises with Verstappen, pushes up to his teammate and starts complaining that Carlos is slowing him down. Ferrari then boxes Carlos early to try and kind of protect from an undercut. Because Hamilton, this is the thing. I know we haven't heard this for a while, but Hamilton was looking very competitive behind the two Ferraris.
He was.
And,
it was impressive.
And so Ferrari actually starting to worry. So they boxed Sainz to protect from an undercut. Leclerc stops a few laps later, and quickly pushes back to the back of his teammate, and then starts complaining. Look, this is ruining my race. So can I please be let past? And Sainz duly does so. In fairness to him. The concern here was Hamilton, who stayed out, and he pretty much stayed out until they swapped the two cars, and they were worried that he was effectively going for a one-stop strategy, because he was on mediums for 33 laps of a 52-lap race. So
again, impressive.
Yeah, it would have been very impressive, and I think if he'd managed to then fit hards, he could have potentially at least gained track position on the Ferraris, and then it could have been quite difficult for them to get past potentially. But at this point, Ocon's car gives up after he managed to get past Verstappen, which was a nice battle that brings back memories from a Brazil race that ended very badly for both of them. I'm still pissed off about that one.
Punches were thrown. I remember that.
Yeah. But this time Ocon was actually on the same lap as Verstappen for a change. And so this is kind of the crucial moment of the race, and I will state the facts and then ask the question, because I think this is the way to go. So Ferrari box Sainz, they leave Leclerc out on 14-lap-old hard tires. So this was lap 39, so 13 laps to go. Box Sainz for new softs. Hamilton covers Sainz and boxes for new softs. And Leclerc gets left at the front of the race with 14-lap-old hard tires. And the question is, what on earth were Ferrari thinking? I know we talked about tools, Mark. I know we talked about having trust in your tools, but how can your tool tell you that a driver that's 3 seconds behind another should stop for soft tires and that Leclerc shouldn't?
So I'm gonna go back just to before that, when Leclerc came up behind Sainz, right? When he was obviously faster. Well, we thought he was faster from the outside, and obviously we don't know what kind of fuel saving or anything else that Sainz was doing, because he was asked to save fuel later, wasn't he, at some point in the race.
That's true.
So from the outside, it's quite difficult to see what's actually going on. And you probably, if you did watch Formula E on the weekend, you would have seen that we had a potentially similar problem when Antonio, and Jev were very similar in pace, although during the race the pace changed. It's quite difficult to tell if one driver really is quicker or not, at some point in the race. And so you have to make a judgment as to how much quicker are they really quicker if you do let them go past? Will they really be able to pull away, or is it because they're behind? Are they getting a benefit you can't see, etc., etc. So to have a parameter that says the driver behind really is quicker, if they're quite close in terms of pace, I think is the first thing. I don't know why they waited so long to switch Leclerc for Sainz. They asked Sainz to go quicker, didn't they? And a few things like that. So it almost makes you think there were some parameters we didn't know, that maybe they had different settings and engine powers or other things that were happening at that point. So my first guess was that they were waiting to see if one of the changes they made would make him quicker again. So that was the first thing I would say. Something in the tools or the way they decide stuff. It almost makes me feel like they haven't. I felt as we grew up as Techeetah in Formula E, we had to kind of go through these stages of learning, if you know what I mean, to get to where we got to eventually, where you come across these scenarios, let's say, and maybe they hadn't discussed what happens if Leclerc is quicker than Sainz or Sainz is quicker than Leclerc. We are going to make a decision like this, very strong and meditated, and sort of have rules in place which say, if you are quicker, and we will decide this way, if you are quicker, we will switch you to achieve what's best for the team. And I think it also showed up in the restart where they asked him to, didn't they say 10 I know I'm jumping ahead of myself, but 10 car lengths to Leclerc.
Yeah.
I think one of the most basic...
To me, that was an admission of we've made a mistake, no?
I think one of the hardest things about strategy is I think sometimes you can get too theoretical, and you can say, okay, if he gives 10 car lengths, Leclerc will be fine. I doubt that would have been the case, and that's what obviously Sainz said on the radio.
Yeah.
If you do this, it won't work. And it's almost like they were thinking too theoretically and not with enough racer in their mind. And so I'm just sort of answering your question. I know it's a long way around, but there's quite a lot of things that happen in those 10 laps or so where you would say, why did they do that particular thing? And as I say, it's almost like they hadn't gone through those scenarios before and said, we will make a decision like this. If this happens, we'll do this. And if that happens, we'll do that. Because certainly we have like a sort of a kind of a rule book, having drivers that are so close together, Antonio and Jev, and certainly with Andre in the past. We found that you had to have not pre-agreed, but premeditated, saying, if this happens, we will most likely do this, unless there's other parameters going on. And, that's when the drivers often come back over the radio and say, I don't agree. And you can say why. And it might be because, no, I can go another 5 laps on these tyres, I'll be okay, sort of thing. These tyres are fine, whereas we're thinking, no, they're not fine, for example. So to answer your question, why did they come in? I mean, it is also, again, you have to be strong in your decisions, and it does feel like maybe they weren't strong in their decisions to bring him in. I don't know whether Sainz actually just decided himself he was coming in. I don't know whether, if he hadn't come in, did they call him? I don't know if they said box, did they?
I don't think so.
That's an interesting one. I mean, I haven't heard the onboard. I need to should go through that to confirm, but I mean, if he can't just come in on his own, he has to box him. Sorry, he can't box himself.
The guys
can call him.
He can, because this is the thing in the past that the mechanics are ready for almost anything. So especially in those top teams, there's so many spare people. When you look at a pit stop, so they always have got the tires ready that. That they believe they will switch to
go in on the car, so he can make that call, but the team is aware of it. It's not like it just showed up. So the kind of the Leclerc side of the garage should be able to react to that.
Yes,
in theory.
It's always a bit like match racing is always harder sometimes it's harder when you're in front, isn't it? Because you're dictating
Of course, yeah. You're the first one to pull the trigger.
Yes. So maybe they thought the hards would be fine, which they obviously weren't. And maybe they thought other things would happen in the race. So yeah, it's a complicated one, wasn't it? And obviously made the wrong decision.
So yeah, in the end, I mean, my reading of it was that them asking Sainz to leave 10 car lengths was kind of a way to try and fix a situation, which was a very clumsy one. I think for me the quote of the season so far is "Stop inventing, stop inventing." That was so funny. That was hilarious. I love that.
Yes.
Don't ask me to do these things. It's fantastic.
Yes.
His reaction.
But that's another one of those things where, as I say, it's almost like they did invent that thought process right there and then, and weren't following their own rules, if you know what I mean. So this comes back to the same thing. What were you going to do if that sort of thing happened? It just felt like a number of the decisions in the race were sort of either not thought through, or maybe it showed a weakness in their total system, let's say.
Mark, do you reckon these are like sort of growing pains of a team that's not used to winning races for the past couple of years?
Hold on.
I don't know if Antonio said to you, he was telling me or asking me about something that happened to us at Super Aguri way back in 2007, where we ended up in the second part of qualifying, and we'd never done it before. And so all of a sudden, Anthony Davidson got into the top 10, and we all went, "Oh, what do we do now again?" We'd not practiced for this because we weren't ready for it, and everyone was scrambling around trying to find the procedures for getting into that part of qualifying. And I remember everyone looks back and laughs now, but we were sitting there going, "Whoa, where's the manual? Where's the manual? What are we supposed to do?" And you're supposed to go to the FI bridge, and then you're supposed to do this. Okay, good. But the mechanics weren't there, and this wasn't ready, and so I often find, to answer your question, yes, when we first did that, it was terrible. And I would say that the same thing happened to us in Formula E. We made a few mistakes, and I'm trying to remember. I remember with the strategy guys in season 3, Jev certainly had the pace to win a race, but we hadn't put together all the pieces of the puzzle, and it wasn't until the final race when he was really on it, and then everyone knew they couldn't stop him, and basically won the race. But everything came together at the end of that year and set us up for the next year, which we won the Drivers' Championship. But then we messed up a bit on the Teams' Championship for quality reasons.
Yeah.
And it wasn't our quality problem, but it didn't matter. It was a quality problem. And so that year we didn't win the teams. And then the following year we won both. It was like it's almost like sometimes you have to go through, to answer your question, I feel like sometimes life's a process. You have to go through it to get to the end, and you can't just cheat. And as my grandfather used to say, there's no such thing as board experience. You almost have to do it yourself, and get there yourself. So the answer is I do believe that's correct.
But hold on. I mean, I completely agree with you, Mark. However, Ferrari were the fastest, had a car to win races in 2019, which is 3 years ago, and fought for the championship in 2018, which is 4 years ago.
But the team was a little bit restructured, wasn't it? And they switched drivers too.
Fine, but when you restructure a team, you keep the knowledge and you keep the tools. It's not like they kind of went back in time.
So.
Just because they haven't been competitive.
I'll give you another example. When Andre Lotto went to Porsche, we had to decide which driver to choose to go with Jev. And a lot of it actually came down to Antonio is very quick. He knows Jev. They both were Red Bull drivers. And he'd worked with a lot of our engineers in season 1 and 2. So we knew that bringing Antonio into the team would be the smoothest driver to do. However, in one of those first races, when he didn't manage to win the race, he didn't yet trust all the tools that we had, and he had to slow down in the last lap because he was overheating his battery. And because he hadn't trusted all the things that we knew or had learned in the previous few years. And then over those next few races, he got to dig in and understand a lot more about how we worked, and lo and behold, you won the championship. So I'm just saying, even though you would say 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they had all the pieces of the puzzle, like Beatriz says, we don't know everything else behind the scenes. New engineers on the pit wall, maybe, to go with new drivers, or some structure that's changed behind the scenes that makes it not as smooth as you imagine. It does take time to get everybody working the same way, especially at this level. At the front of the grid, all your mistakes are there for everybody to see. But middle of the grid, it's harder to see. And I think it just highlights everything we know, intensifies the whole thing when you're at the front. So don't know the answer, but I can certainly have experienced sort of not similar, but other things in some ways.
Fair enough. So the result was obviously Sainz and Hamilton stopped. Sainz easily got past Leclerc and just took off, pretty much disappeared. Then there's an epic battle that lasts for 2-3 laps between Hamilton, Leclerc, and Perez, with Alonso watching behind. I think he tried to get. Yeah, I think he tried to get stuck in a bit, but then as soon as they turned into, I think it was cops, you realized, you just don't have downforce, do you? Because it was like trying, it was like get a slipstream, and then there's suddenly a 2-car length gap that forms because Hamilton can go much faster through cops than Alonso can. But Leclerc puts on an epic defense of his P2. I mean, he managed to stay in front of Hamilton for about, I don't know, 15 corners longer than he should have. So to be fair, I was very, very impressed by what he did then. But ultimately, the tires just weren't there, and Hamilton and Perez both got past. Hamilton ends up P3, Perez P2. And
Carlos Sainz take the win. Yay!
Maiden win for Carlos.
Goes wild. He got pole, fastest lap, and he won the race.
No, Hamilton got
Did he not get
fastest lap.
fastest lap?
No,
but that was at
Hamilton
the
got
end.
fastest lap.
I missed that.
Yeah,
I
on the
thought he
last
got
lap.
fastest lap.
Aww. Did you not hear the radio? It was like Carlos, the engineer tells him,
The last bit I missed. No.
Yeah, the engineer told me, Hamilton got us fastest lap in the end. And he's like, it's okay, you can have it. So that was quite funny. Again, it was a first for many things. The first time I ever heard Carlos Sainz being funny. It's impressive. It's been a weekend of firsts.
Well, it was pretty funny when he said Mariah Carey's name was
Mariah Carey.
I like that.
Mariah Carey.
Did you see that, Mark?
Yes. Do you think that in those final laps, I'll ask you guys a question. Do you think the current cars can race closer together? Because it was pretty impressive. Some of those overtakes by Leclerc, etc. They were pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we've had a few examples this season where these battles last, a good few laps longer than they would have last year. I think this battle would have lasted 4 corners last year, and then one of the drivers would have been out of tires, and that would be game over. Whereas I think this year they can follow a lot for a lot longer at least, and
it's a lot more entertaining to watch, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's plans for another step in 2026, I think, of kind of a new generation of regulations to kind of, magnify this even more. So hopefully we're going in the right direction. But I think so. Obviously in Formula E, it's a completely different kind of ball game because it's a lot more about kind of energy management. But in terms of the following, it is quite a lot easier to follow, it looks like, because obviously the cars have a lot less downforce than Formula 1 cars.
Yes.
Do you think that that's the direction Formula 1 should go in, or not really?
That's an interesting question. To keep the lap times where they are, I don't think they can. Obviously reduce downforce too much. So I think it's been the right way to go with the floors, because when you look at the lift over drag ratio of a floor versus a wing, it's incredibly more efficient. So the floors should be, obviously the porpoising has opened up some other things, but going the way of putting more of the downforce on the floor certainly makes sense. And it does seem that the cars are getting to solve all of their porpoising problems and other things aerodynamically. So I think it's the right way to go if you want to keep the speed and the spectacle. So it would be nice to be able to reduce downforce, but you wouldn't keep the the speed and the spectacle.
Yeah, I mean, there've been arguments about making the cars lighter to make up for a loss of downforce, but the problem is safety is the reason, a big part of the reason why the cars are heavier. And after what happened, in the first lap of this race, it's pretty obvious that that's kind of the way to go. That safety needs to be put before everything else. All right, so
Should we go
what
to
do the
standings?
standings? Yeah, what do the standings look like after this race, Beatriz?
So, first place, we have Max with 181 points. Then Sergio Perez with 147. Charles Leclerc is in third place. Carlos Sainz is in fourth with 127. Might be that he ends the year ahead of Leclerc. João, fingers crossed, huh?
Honestly,
And we have...
honestly,
yeah.
we're still going on this.
I'm just baiting you.
One thing I forgot to say, and now that you've poked me, I need to say it, is I feel like there's this, I don't know if anyone follows baseball, but there's this American baseball player called Barry Bonds, who I think he still has the home run. I think he still has a home run record, but he got done for doping, so his record has an asterisk next to it. And I feel like this victory for Carlos should have an asterisk next to it. That's like Ferrari did it so badly that I feel like there should be a little asterisk next to this win.
Doesn't matter. First year in Ferrari was ahead of Leclerc. So, points are points. Fifth place, George Russell. In sixth, Lewis Hamilton with 93 points. Then Lando Norris, Valtteri Bottas, Esteban Ocon. And in 10th place, we have Fernando Alonso with 28 points. In the Constructors' Championship, we have Red Bull in first place with 328 points. Ferrari in second with 265. Mercedes in third. McLaren in fourth with 73 points. Alpine in fifth with 67. Alfa Romeo is in sixth place, and AlphaTauri in seventh, Haas in eighth, Aston Martin in ninth, and last place is Williams with 3 points.
But, by the way, 2 Haases in the points, Schumacher P8 and Magnussen P10. I mean, what?
Yes.
This was a strange weekend. Very strange weekend.
Silverstone does bring out the weirdest things in F1, doesn't it?
I don't know, not usually. Usually it's more like Baku. This looks like a Baku race. It just happened in Silverstone. Like, very strange. All right, shall we move on to fantasy and our fantasy championship? How did we do?
Mark, I'm curious. If you had to have your own fantasy team, what would you call it? Your F1 team?
I'd probably just call it Preston F1, which is what I tried to start 25 years ago.
Okay, fine.
That's it's there's a reason cliches are cliches. That's solid. You can't fault that. It's fine.
João, do you want to tell Mark what's the name of your team?
Oh, so every year I pick my favorite girlfriend or wife of a Formula One driver, and I name my team after her out of respect for their role in the spectacle. So last year I had Kelly Piquet racing, and this year I have Heidi Berger racing, who's obviously Daniel's girlfriend.
Right, so in first place we have Final Hope with 242 points, Astro Team in second with 227, and Ferrari with 223 points in third place. And then I'm curious to see where I am, because I haven't seen it. Have you seen it, João? Oh, here I am. Smooth Operation is my team, Mark, by the way. Very on brand for me. 19th place with 122 and 92 points. Heidi Berger Racing, João's team, is in 25th place with 177 points. And Tiago's team, Papayamos, he's a McLaren fan. He's in...
P nowhere.
What place? Exactly, P nowhere. 37, here he is with 147 points.
Okay, not that bad then.
It was pretty bad. And the overall championship, we have first place, Rajada, with 1,993 points. Second place, Abu Dhabi Scam F1 team with 1,903 points. And in third place, Astro team with 1,886 points. And I'm in third place too. Wait. So I'm in third place too. Smooth Operation. And where are you guys? Nowhere to be seen.
Well, it's a long season. Let's chill. I mean,
I know it's a sprint, but it's going to be hard to recover.
it's been a
here you
very
are.
strange season.
You're number 30, João, with 1,727 points. And Tiago, I think Tiago is even worse, isn't he?
Yes, he is nowhere. But let's calm our horses. Let's
Calm our
there's
horse.
a lot
Tiago
of-
is here, number 51, with 1,566 points.
I'm only 150 points behind you. That can easily be swung
And
by a well-timed
Kicking
Mega
all
Driver.
your butts. So let's just enjoy this moment.
Let's not get too much into this. Okay, so and then quickly over through Casino Domingos. So I bet on Perez winning this race. Sorry, George Russell winning this race.
You're betting on George Russell winning.
I did on for Silverstone.
For Silverstone, right.
So I put 10 euros on that, and obviously that didn't come through. But I put 20 euros on Vettel making the top 10, and that obviously came through. So I made quite a lot of cash. So I now have 1,563 euros of our fake euros. And Beatriz, you bet on Perez winning the race, didn't come through, and also on K-Mag being in the top 10. That came through, but you only bet 5 euros, so you're now in second. Well, still in third place, but on the 735 euros, fake euros. And Tiago put 5 euros on Russell winning the race. That didn't come through, and 20 euros on Albon making the top 10. He obviously DNF'd after the first lap crash, so he's now still second on 789 points. And for the Austrian Grand Prix, which is already the next weekend, I'm putting 5 euros on Perez as the winner and 20 euros on K-Mag to finish in the top 10. Beatriz?
I'm betting on... Who did I bet? Was it
Leclerc.
Leclerc? Yes, I'm betting on Leclerc winning the race and Vettel placing top 10.
So 3 euros on Leclerc, 2 euros on Vettel, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and Tiago's not here today. We'll put 30 euros on Max winning the race, which, just to clarify, if this bet comes through, out of these 30 euros, Tiago will make 3. Because the odds are 1.1, so it's it's a big risk for a very, very small reward. But I do think it is quite likely that Max wins the race, but I just don't think the odds are there. And then he's put 20 euros on Albon making the top 10 once again. Mark, if you had to pick a winner to bet on for the next race, who would that be?
That's a good point. There's going to be a lot of learning experiences, isn't it? Austria, you've got to really go for Red Bull, don't you? So it'd have to be Max, I suppose.
And out of the following drivers, who do you think is most likely to make the top 10?
Who's your favorite underdog?
Vettel,
is what we're asking you.
Tsunoda, Guan Yu Zhou, Kevin Magnussen, Schumacher, Stroll, Albon, or Latifi?
I think I have to go for Vettel.
Yeah, that's right. I think he's on a good run of form, and
Yes.
even after poor qualifying in Silverstone, he did manage to walk in the top 10. So that's not a bad bet at all.
Yeah.
All right. So it's time for our final segment called Esbaralhões da Semana, and we have a nice jingle that's going to come in a second. So in this segment, just to explain, Mark, we kind of pick a crash that's happened since the previous episode, really. One where no one got hurt, obviously, but normally we go for something quite funny and unusual, and it's a bit of a laugh. But today I think we'll obviously take a bit of the F1 lap 1 crash, but also something that happened in Formula 2 that's kind of a bit of an ode to the halo. So Roy Nissany, who has been a star of this segment already once this season, when he crashed from the lead into the pit entry in Imola. That was interesting. So this time he was fighting with Dennis Hauger, who is, Pedro Matos is his engineer. He's been a guest in our show before. And they were fighting for position. I think around turn 3, between turn 3 and turn 4. And Nissany just does something very silly, just basically bashes Hauge off track, to the point where Hauge ends up kind of losing control, climbing over a curb and landing on top of Nissany as he tries to take turn 4. And it's a pretty dumb move, to be honest, from Roy. But the ultimate kind of result is that, once again, I think the Halos has spared someone from getting at least seriously hurt, if not worse than that. Were you a fan of the Halo when it first got introduced, Mark?
Yeah, I suppose coming from the safety side of things, that was my job previously. So it's certainly one of those weaknesses in the car, in terms of, that's the only area that's not protected. So yeah, a bit of a fan of anything that, as I said earlier, limits down anything that can get into the driver.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen several examples in the past few years where, I mean, the Halo has helped preventing kind of serious injury to drivers, and I think this weekend there were two very clear cases of that. Anyway, glad everyone's okay. Nissany's all good. Hauge was a bit shaken, but he was also all good. And yeah, well done to everyone who worked on and developed the Halo, and big respect to all those guys. And that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. I hope you had fun and enjoyed it.
Yes.
Thank you for doing it with us, Mark.
No problem. Good fun.
And we will be back next week to talk about the Austrian Grand Prix, which is at the Red Bull Ring in Spielberg this coming weekend. Don't forget to use all your mega drivers, because everyone knows Max is going to win this.
I haven't changed my team.
I haven't either. I haven't had the time to do it either, but come on, you have to do it this weekend.
Yeah, let's use all our cards.
Because there are not that many races left before the midpoint of the season anyway. So let's get updating our teams. And yeah, have a nice week, and see you for Red Bull Ring.
Bye. See you next week.
Is that a podium, boys? Is that a podium?
That's the podium.
Last place at the end of lap 1 comes home to win.
What the is this guy doing? Well, I just want to say you're an absolute legend.
Holy mac and cheese balls. That's another podium.
That was stupid from whoever was at the front. They want to kill us or what?
Can you believe it? Can you believe it?